In 1952, India held its first general election. The raw numbers defined the scale of the challenge: 173 million eligible voters, 85% of whom were entirely illiterate, spread across a geography defined by extreme poverty. Western democracies had historically extended voting rights in stages, usually after achieving industrial wealth and mass education. Implementing universal adult franchise immediately in a nation with these metrics carried significant logistical and political risk. To run an election where the vast majority of the electorate could not read a ballot paper, the state had to redesign the physical mechanics of voting. They bypassed literacy by assigning recognizable symbols to each candidate. At the polling station, a separate physical box was placed for each symbol, and voters simply dropped a blank token into the box of their choice. Over decades, this process was refined into a single paper ballot stamped next to a symbol, and eventually the interface of modern electronic voting machines. But designing the physical mechanics of voting only solved the logistical hurdle. The deeper structural challenge remained: how to extract a cohesive, functional governing mandate from a population fractured along thousands of linguistic, caste, and regional lines. To prevent this fragmentation from causing legislative gridlock, the Indian state maintained stability through two distinct architectural models over the next 70 years. First, it relied on internal coalitions managed by a single dominant party. Then, after 1989, it shifted to external coalitions negotiated among multiple independent parties. To understand how the world's largest democracy survived its own diversity, we have to look at how these two very different systems engineered political consensus. Under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru, the Indian National Congress won commanding majorities in the 1952, 1957, and 1962 elections. They consistently secured around 3/4 of the seats in the Lok Sabha, reducing opposition groups like the Communist Party to minor representation. Looking at this map, markers 2I and 2-2 represent Uttar Pradesh and Maharashtra, entrenched power centers for the Congress mandate. But markers 1I and 1-2 show the limits of that hegemony, where regional dynamics actively resisted the center. Congress maintained its national grip because the party was not a monolith. It operated as a massive social and ideological coalition. The party structure acted as an umbrella, simultaneously containing distinct factions of socialists, conservatives, moderates, and extremists. This meant internal factionalism was a mechanism for stability. Dissatisfied groups stayed inside the umbrella to negotiate power. External opposition found little traction because their talking points were already championed by internal factions. This stands in direct contrast to institutionalized one-party states of the era, like China or Syria, where a single ruling party is enforced by law. The system succeeded by acting as a clearinghouse for national interests. By absorbing diverse political currents into a single organizational platform, Congress neutralized opposition movements before they could coalesce outside the party. Eventually, sections Congress failed to absorb began to coordinate. Leaders from different ideological backgrounds realized they shared a single objective: breaking the Congress monopoly. The 1977 general election marked the critical structural breaking point. For the first time since independence, Congress lost its grip on the national electorate. This map highlights the geographic severity of that collapse. Markers A and B denote Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, the heavily populated Hindi-speaking belt that had anchored Congress power. In 1977, Congress suffered a total rout in these strongholds. The national seat distribution shifted drastically. Congress shrank to just 154 seats, while the Janata Party alliance captured 330 seats. Opposition leaders realized that dismantling the Congress mandate was a problem of mathematics. They abandoned ideological purity for strategic coordination, ensuring their shared voter base was no longer split. Once the path to power outside Congress was proven viable, internal factions had no mathematical reason to stay. Regional and caste-based groups began splintering off. The 1977 election proved the umbrella model was obsolete. The era of accommodating competing interests internally had ended, forcing a highly fragmented, multi-party future. By 1989, single-party dominance was entirely gone. No single party could secure the 272 seats required to form a majority in the Lok Sabha. The battle for consensus moved out of the closed-door party committees and directly onto the legislative floor. Prime Minister VP Singh led the National Front government, but his core alliance lacked the numbers to govern alone. He survived by relying on external support from diametrically opposed groups, the Communist Left Front on one side and the nationalist BJP on the other. This architecture was exceptionally fragile. The central executive was entirely dependent on these external links. If a proposed policy alienated just one partner, they could withdraw support, immediately collapsing the government. Yet this instability produced highly consequential policies. The National Front implemented the Mondal Commission report, granting a 27% reservation to other backward classes. This policy permanently realigned Indian politics around caste identity and representation. The subsequent United Front governments between 1996 and 1998 amplified this decentralization. Their coalitions were heavily composed of regional parties, like the DMK in Tamil Nadu and the TDP in Andhra Pradesh. Relying on state leaders for political survival meant national policy began reflecting specific state development goals. Federalism became the baseline requirement for a majority. The burden of forging consensus inverted. Instead of a national party dictating terms to states, diverse regional parties were dictating terms to the central government. Over time, the rapid government collapses of the 1990s settled into a new equilibrium. Pre-election alliances became the standard operating procedure, notably the National Democratic Alliance, led by Atal Bihari Vajpayee, which successfully completed a full term in power. This model of stable, multi-party alliances was standardized by the United Progressive Alliance. Under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, this coalition governed for a decade, proving that complex power-sharing agreements could provide long-term administration. Two structural models engineered consensus in India. On the left, the intra-party coalition provided high executive stability but limited regional autonomy. On the right, the modern inter-party coalition requires constant compromise but guarantees federalized representation, giving regional voters a direct veto. In 1952, the state faced the pure mathematical problem of extracting a mandate from an electorate divided by thousands of competing identities. The shift away from single-party rule is frequently framed as a decline in political order, but when measuring the structural demands of a hyper-diverse electorate, coalition politics operates as the logical mechanism required to maintain a democratic consensus.